Socialism, the term that may sound either tyrannical or democratic to you. In this video, we will not pick a side of the debate, but rather we will answer the question of what is socialism, by going through the history of it chronologically. The history of socialism could be traced back thousands of years ago, particularly in Plato's time. In one of his works, Republic, Plato articulated an ideal society when men and women were the guardian class of the public. The book pointed out that every individual had a designated role to serve the society, making Plato's work as the earliest signs of ancient socialism. In the 16th century, English social philosopher Thomas More continued to put a more emphasis on these ideas. More envisioned a utopian society where communal ownership was practiced and money was abolished. Simultaneously, More was influenced by Plato, thus most of his work revolved around Plato's ideas. In his society, men had to yield their possession each 10 years to prevent ownership pride. He believed that these were the causes of sins such as envy, jealousy, and greed. People only needed to work for a certain hour per day, and the rest was dedicated to leisure. Beginning of the 19th century, one of the first utopian socialists, Saint-Simon, who was a French political philosopher, advocated for the amelioration of the lower classes. His views were based on a rational form of society, where brotherhood is respected and common interest is embraced. Saint-Simon, however, did not call for public ownership of production, but rather the public control of property through central planning, where scientists, engineers, and industrialists would anticipate the needs of society. Saint-Simon also endorsed the idea of societal progression. That's why he believed that feudalism was giving its way to capitalism for further development. Similarly, Charles Fourier and Robert Owen were also the two popular names that exhibit the early form of socialism. Robert Owen saw human nature were not naturally depraved, aggressive, nor selfish. Owen was aware that these behaviors were shaped by social conditions. In his New Harmony plan in 1825, he set out a social organization based on his beliefs, a self-sufficient and cooperative utopian community where property was publicly owned. Unfortunately, the plan ultimately resulted in failure, which took most of Owen's fortune with it. In addition to that, Charles Fourier proposed a different solution. Fourier saw that modern society was breeding all the vices and sins of humanity. Institutions like, he argued, male dominations within the family and the restraint of competitive markets were the factors that pushed many into endless hours of unwanted labor. As a result, he visualized a form of society where labor is both attractive and voluntary, a society where property is shared collectively. The system was later named philanthropy in French, or philanthropy. These ideas soon inspired many subsequent socialists, and there was one figure who managed to rise up and receive the most credit: Karl Marx. Marx was born in a middle-class family, with his father serving as a successful lawyer and a wealthy mother. In his later life, Marx regarded those early socialists as naive. He saw socialism as a means to end class struggle. He saw industrial capitalism was the antagonist of the 19th century. Marx was also inspired by Friedrich Hegel. Both of them understood human labor and struggle as the history of humanity. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels wrote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." Unlike Hegel's, Marx's history was based on class struggles over materials and economic possessions. Before anything could be fought or produced for, necessity should be considered the primary goal according to Marx. The necessity here for Marx was freedom, the freedom to enjoy life and develop one's potential talent. Marx thought this necessity was restricted only to members of the ruling class, who held control over properties and the means of production. In feudalism, serfs were exploited by the landlords. In slavery, slave owners brutally oppressed their slaves. And likewise, in capitalism, the bourgeoisie did the same to their workers or the proletarians. Marx saw revolution as inevitable and believed that the proletariat would rise up and arm themselves to seize the means of production and overthrow the bourgeoisie. The society was later to be converted into a revolutionary government where the power lies in the hands of the working class or the dictatorship of the proletariat. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx did not clearly draw a distinction between communism and socialism. Yet, Marx was certain that socialism was the building blocks towards communism. In his later life, Marx shifted his focus on criticizing his opponents, including his communist rivals, which was coherently compacted inside a book called Das Kapital. In 1883, Marx passed away at the age of 64, making him one of the greatest system builders in modern history. After the death of Marx, many socialists across Europe began to address themselves as Marxists. Additionally, many forms of socialism began to take place, such as Fabianism, Christian socialism, anarcho-socialism, and etc. In the same year, a leading Marxist socialist party in Europe called the SPD, or the Social Democratic Party of Germany, began to become popular. The party raised a subtle concern regarding the doctrines of Marxism. Why? Because in 1890, the party won 1/5 of the votes casted inside the parliament election. Leaders and members within the party now saw that socialism could be achieved through peaceful methods rather than violent revolution. Socialists were left with two choices: adhere to the principle of orthodox Marxism or to reform, later known as revisionism, which was to change Marxist doctrines according to the circumstance. Amid the crowd, there was Edward Bernstein. Bernstein was one of the foremost revisionists and the one who reckoned the condition of society differently from his fellow Marxists. Bernstein saw that capitalism was progressing and condition of the proletariat were improving. While in England, he was exposed to Fabianism, an ideology that advocates for a gradual and peaceful reform to achieve socialism. In his book, Evolutionary to Socialism, Bernstein argued for a moderate path to obtain the system. This enraged many orthodox Marxists inside the SPD, which was a series of polemical wars between the socialists. After several years, revisionists started to triumph across Europe, and the SPD finally chose to follow the path of democratic socialism. Following that, there emerged a socialist figure in Russia who was known as Vladimir Lenin. Lenin was a Marxist, but his path was deemed to have gone astray. Unlike his fellow Marxist Russians, he thought that there's no need for a capitalist state to prepare for socialism. In his political pamphlet, What is to be Done?, he argued to establish a discipline of elites or the vanguards to lead the proletariat for the sake of revolution. In the book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin felt that revisionism was kind of a bribe that allowed the capitalists to brutally exploit the workers' labor in other parts of the world. He saw capitalism and imperialism as interrelated because they mutually help one or the other. Hence, the possibility of a country going through revolution without capitalist stage is possible for Lenin. During World War I, Russia was severely inflicted by the war. This pushed many into poverty and contributed to the later collapse of the Russian Empire. In 1917, the October Revolution abruptly erupted. The Bolsheviks successfully seized control. Very soon later, Lenin called for a meeting for the formation of the Communist International, or the Comintern, in order to safeguard his regime and the widespread of socialist movement across the world, which basically served as an agent for the creation of the USSR. Lenin's socialism, or Leninism-Marxism, was relatively controversial in the world. Many would say that Lenin was a revisionist, and the others would argue that he was a Marxist. Yet, his system was authoritarian, a system where the elites would represent the working class to run the country. According to Lenin, there's only the proletarians and the bourgeoisie in society. Besides, the party represents the masses, which means that any external interests outside the people would be deemed as destructive and treasonous. As a result, Lenin called for a one-party system, where he argued, but an essential condition for such an alliance must be the full opportunity for the socialists to reveal to the working class that its interests are diametrically opposed to the interests of the bourgeoisie. Hence, for Lenin, he wished to create a party without dissents, a party that worked together for the interests of the people. The freedom, he thought, is to be free from disapproval and conflicts. Moving forward to the middle of 20th century, socialism and communism flaws began to become explicit. From mass purge of high-ranking officials and the formation of an excessively centralized government propelled many to contemplate. Post-World War II forced socialists to rethink. Thus, most of them began to seek moderation. They now did not want an authoritarian regime with too much power lying in the hands of the proletariat. They saw the failures of central planning and rampant corruption inside various communist states. Therefore, many chose to stick with democratic socialism. Socialists were now content with some degree of capitalism inside their system. They no longer see a worldwide victory for socialism. Many countries also succeeded in doing so. In the Scandinavian country Sweden, the Swedish Social Democratic Party exemplifies the early success of democratic socialism in the 20th century, when they continued to gain most of the trust of the people. Indeed, socialism has evolved throughout history. Personally, I think socialism does not have a definite meaning, since each period gives us a distinct answer to such a question. Socialism, or any political philosophies, will continue to progress further in order to adapt with the modern life. I hope this video explains you well, and I will see you in the next one.